In the last video, we explained what chronological Bible teaching is and how it uses progressive revelation to teach the Bible's narrative. In this video, I'll be talking about how to actually teach Chron. So we'll go over who is qualified to teach it, what do we mean by progressive revelation, and finally, how to understand the Bible as a narrative. So first of all, who is qualified to teach Chron? Well, anyone who knows the story qualifies to teach it. Just like with any other field of knowledge, if you're familiar with the subject matter, then that makes you a good teacher. But what do we mean by knowing the story? Well, there's three basic things that you need to know in order to teach Chron. First of all, where is the story going? Now imagine you're on a road trip and you're trying to use a map to get to your destination, but you haven't selected your destination yet. The map's not going to help you until you actually know where it is that you're wanting to go. In the same way, your point in telling the Bible story is to bring your audience to a carefully planned destination. So you need to be aware of where it is that the Bible story wants to take us. What is the final goal of the Bible? What is it that it wants to teach us? Second, you need to know the central theme of the Bible story. Every story has a theme that runs throughout. That simply means what's really going on in the middle of all the different parts. So how do the parts connect together to make the whole? Finally, you need to know the ending, because how the story ends affects how you tell it. So you have to be familiar with how all of the different parts come together in the end to form the big picture. Remember, we said that Chron puts all the pieces of the puzzle together so that we can see the big picture in the end. Well, if you don't know what the picture is supposed to look like, it's going to be hard for you to put those pieces together. Now, when you tell a joke, you have to know the punchline of the joke, otherwise it's going to fall flat. Now, just like jokes have punchlines, stories have punchlines as well. So Chron views each individual story as having a very specific point. Now, often when we look at the stories of the Bible, we tend to view them as having a wide range of potential meanings that we can take out and use to back up our own sermon points. But Chron views the stories as being very specific in their meanings, and we want to know what those meanings are. In other words, what did God want to communicate to us when He put those stories there? So a good teacher needs to know what point each story is making. All right, next you need to know what your place is in the story. Now imagine you are lost at a large airport and you don't know how to find your way out. So what do? Well, you find out where that map is that gives you the overall picture of the whole airport and then tells you exactly where you are in relation to the big picture. In the same way, you want to constantly be aware of where you are at in the overall view of the Bible story. So first, what has gone behind you? How does your current story connect to what you have already told? And then you have to know what is yet to come. In other words, how does your current story play into what's coming next? So constantly be aware of your surroundings. Constantly see yourself in the big picture. This means that you need to often back up in your mind and get that overall panoramic view of where the story is going. Okay, let's talk about teaching through progressive revelation. And by this, we simply mean, as we've said, teaching truth over time. Now remember that we are trying to build a worldview for our audience. We're not just trying to change their behaviors or change their beliefs. We're actually giving them a worldview. This takes time. So imagine that you are building a ladder that will take your audience to full knowledge of the Bible. With each story being a step, you are bringing them closer to knowing who God is. Now this is your destination. This is where you're trying to bring your audience to, is to where they can know God. And so that means that you need to build on previous information. That is why it's so important to lay a good foundation, because each story is connected to the previous one. You're building on information that you have previously established. Next, you have to withhold information until the proper time. Don't jump ahead of the story. In other words, keep it chronological. When you're building that ladder, you don't want to go from the bottom rung to the middle to the top. Now, I'll put this in here that obviously we won't be able to teach every single story in the whole Bible. Depending on where you're at and how much time you have, you may only be able to teach a few of the stories. But the stories that you do use have to be in a chronological order, and you need to show how they connect to each other. You need to build on that foundation. So remember that you are the channel through which they are going to receive their worldview. That's an incredible responsibility. So you have to be strategic in how you build that worldview for them. Make sure that you keep the information organized. Okay, let's talk about the Bible being a narrative. Most of us enjoy a good story. Now there's three elements that are necessary in a story. First, there is an author, then you have characters, and you have a plot. Any story has to have these things. Now, the Bible has these three elements as well. Now, let's break these down. So, under author, first of all, you have ownership. Most authors will copyright their book in order to preserve not just the content, but also the style. Now, in the same way, we need to honor the style that God wrote the Bible in as much as possible, so that we're actually communicating in the way that He wanted to communicate when He wrote the book. And then there is design. Now, we would not expect the creator of the universe to write a book that is carelessly and haphazardly put together. We would expect, as we said in the first video, that there would be a divinely given historical structure that runs throughout. Then there is character, and that simply means that there is a person behind the book. In other words, there's a personality that is conveying itself throughout the story. As we go through the story of the book, we actually begin to know that personality. In other words, we begin to think as he thinks. We begin to actually take on some of his opinions. And that's our whole goal in teaching the Bible as a story, is to get our audience to actually process information in the way that God does. And then you have characters. Every story has three basic sets of characters. First, you have a protagonist. This is simply the good guy with a good plan in mind. Then you have the antagonist, which is the bad guy or an enemy who seeks to overthrow the good plan. Now this, by necessity, creates war. Now the Bible is a book of war. It most definitely has a good guy and a bad guy, and it therefore has a struggle that goes throughout the entire book. And then you have stock characters. These are not the main characters, but they're definitely involved in the plot, and they play a major role in the story. And then beneath plot, you have first of all the exposition. That simply means the opening scene where the characters, the time, and the place is introduced, and the stage is set for the story to begin. And then you have the rising action, in which the enemy rises. The struggle begins between the two opposing forces, and the stage is set for the war. And then you have the climax, in which there is a climax in the war. There's a final battle. The winner is crowned, and the bad guy is defeated. And then you have the resolution. This is where all the subplots come together. It's where you see all the loose ends meet to form the final big picture of the story. The bad guy leaves the story, and everyone lives happily ever after. Now, the Bible, like we said, has all of these parts. In other words, it is a narrative. And so this is what we mean about the Bible being one connected story from beginning to the end. It is something that we can follow, that carries all the way through. It focuses on stories, and is therefore something that most people can grasp. Okay, let's give a quick review of everything that we've looked at in this video. So first of all, who is qualified to teach Chron? Well, you can teach Chron. If you know the story, then you are qualified to teach it. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to be a good speaker even. If you can tell any story, if you can tell a fishing story, a hunting story, you can tell the story of the Bible. Then we talked about presenting through progressive revelation, talking about building a worldview for our audience, helping them climb to actually coming to know God, and how we need to be strategic about this. And then finally, understanding the Bible's narrative, how the Bible has all the different parts of a good story. And because it's a narrative, it is something that people can understand. Those who are illiterate, culturally diverse people, and those who have no exposure to the Bible, they can understand who God is as we teach them the story of the Bible. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in teaching Chron yourself, be sure to watch my next video on the overview of the Bible story so that you can get a good grasp on where the story is going, like we talked about in the beginning of this video, and then also the individual training videos on how to teach each individual lesson. Thank you so much, and see you next time.